My firm has been in business for about 26 years. One of the largest concentrations of our investments over those 2 decades has actually been in Bronzeville, so we're really pleased to be a part of this morning's panel. We've worked with our partners at Oakwood Shores and Shops and Lofts at 47th Street and the developer of the 47th and Lake Park Shopping Center and a number of other developers who are bringing infill, affordable, and to some degree mixed-income housing to the submarkets throughout the Bronzeville community. So we are really pleased to be here. So we have a wonderful panel this morning, and the goal is to do 3 things. One, we'll make sure that you know who they are, and also have them talk a little bit about how they've been catalytic in economic development across their careers and at their various organizations. We'll spend about 10 minutes doing that. Then amongst ourselves, if it's okay with you all, we'll have a facilitated conversation. I've got some prepared questions from the Bronzeville Community Development Partnership. And then we'll open the floor for you all to engage with the panelists directly for about 5 to 10 minutes. Is that okay with everyone? I'm looking at Rhonda. Thank you, Rhonda. I've got your permission. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of a sense of this august panel that we've assembled here. So immediately to my left is Angie Marks, who is the Vice President of Real Estate at Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives. I'm really proud that her organization and mine are in a partnership with the J.P. Morgan Chase Pro Neighborhoods Collaborative to affect retail development in 6 submarkets in the city. But Angie, to read her bio, and let me find my readers. I'm really proud that I've graduated to the class where I need spectacles. For nearly 20 years, she's got a deep experience in economic development. She oversees planning, entitlement, financing, and development at the Chicago Neighborhood Initiative's commercial real estate projects. Prior to C&I, Angie served as the Deputy Commissioner for the Chicago Department of Housing and as a Director of Redevelopment at Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago. Angie earned her undergraduate degree and master's in urban planning at the University of Illinois at Champaign. And Angie is a member of the board of directors at Home. So welcome, Angie. Next, we have Sydney Dillard, who, if I'm not mistaken, is also a Bronzeville resident. Is that right?
Yes,
Sydney?
I am.
All right, so we are
proud of it.
well, we're glad that you're here and wearing both hats. So Sydney is a partner at Loop Capital in Corporate Investment Banking Division. She's the head of that investment banking division at Loop. In addition to managing the corporate team at Loop, Sydney is responsible for relationship management and the team's business development efforts with corporations across all areas of the firm, including bond underwriting, initial public offerings, private institutional capital raising, and mergers and acquisitions advisory. Sydney serves on the firm's management committee and fairness and valuation committee. She has 30 years of experience encompassing a long tenure at Northern Trust Company, where she was a senior vice president and division manager responsible for commercial banking, treasury management, retirement plan custody, and investment services for large corporations. Really glad to have you, Sydney. And last but certainly not least, and we've had to work on making sure we pronounce his name correctly, but we're really glad to have his brother with us, Ingo Harry, who is vice president of JLC Infrastructure. Ingo has over 10 years of experience in the investment banking and infrastructure, media, telecommunications, technology, and services, and industrial sectors. That's a lot, Ingo. Currently, he works as the VP for JLC Infrastructure, and investment and asset management firm focused on transportation, energy, utilities, communications, social infrastructure sectors in the U.S. Prior to joining JLC, Ingo spent 3 years with Infrastructure Management Group. He also works on the infrastructure advisory and investment firm based in Washington, D.C. During his time with IMG, Ingo provided financial advisory services and evaluated investment opportunities for toll roads. You know, toll roads has a bad name in this region. Commuter rail, aviation, ports, and bridge projects. So let's give our panelists a big round of applause. So I'm not going to stand the entire time, and I'm going to figure out what to do with these reading glasses. I'm really getting used to wearing them. So the theme of today's session is whether, essentially to break it down, is big money finally coming to the Bronzeville South Lakefront, and why now and will it last? But we're going to start off, just to prime the pump, asking each panelist to spend about 3 minutes walking us through a particularly catalytic community development project that they've developed or financed. So who would like to kick us off?
I'll
Okay,
start,
Angie,
Cal,
please
and
do.
I'd be happy to start. We'll skip that. I think he needs to reboot.
We had a little bit of audio-visual for you, but Angie's just going to talk.
I'll just talk. So I'd love to talk a little bit about a catalytic project that we've been involved in Pullman on the far south side. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. I work for Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives. As Calvin said, we're a not-for-profit community development corporation, and our work in Pullman over the last 10 years has really been about a holistic approach to community development. And one of our challenges is always to balance big, high-impact projects that really at scale that can bring additional investment to the community, and also focus on those smaller quality-of-life projects that also greatly impact the residents and entrepreneurs in the community. So in Pullman, we started with some of the bigger high-impact projects in Pullman Park, starting with, which is a 180-acre site right at 111th and the Bishop Ford. We did a year-long community planning process to find out what the community really saw as the most urgent needs in the community. The things that came up were, the first was groceries and retail, the second was jobs, and then the third was just opportunities for entrepreneurs to participate in the community and in the investment in the community. So first step was to get a grocery store. That was about 5-6 years ago now, not really at the height of the market. We were able to attract Walmart and 150,000 square foot full service Walmart to really plant the flag at 111th and the Bishop Ford to attract additional investment.
That was the Supercenter, right?
Supercenter, yep. And they hired about 400 people to kick it off. The next sort of big scale project was Method Home, a really interesting manufacturing company that is committed to sustainable, eco-friendly cleaning products, personal care products. They wanted to put their first manufacturing facility in a neighborhood that they could be part of a community revitalization process. So Method came, 150,000 square foot facility. They hired about 100 people from the 60628 zip code. And some interesting things that they did, they got a tenant called Gotham Greens to put on the roof, which is a hydroponic producer of leafy greens. So we have the world's North American largest greenhouse on the roof of Method, producing about 1 million pounds of leafy greens a year on the roof. So that was another kind of catalytic project. That really attracted our next big catalytic project, which is Whole Foods Distribution Center. About 1.5 years ago, they were their lease was running out in Indiana and looking for a new location for their distribution center, and because of all of this investment that had been going on, decided on Pullman. So those projects represent about $200 million of investment over the last 10 years, which is, but to sort of round this out and finish up, those have been some of the big things we've been working on. We also are very committed to some of the smaller impact projects that really impact quality of life in the neighborhood. We continue to do an affordable housing program where we buy and rehab vacant buildings in the historic Pullman community for affordable home ownership one by one. They don't have a tremendous catalytic impact with each house, but over time they have huge impacts on neighborhood quality. And then we're just cutting the ribbon Monday on a small retail development on 111th Street that's really focused on restaurants, neighborhood retail. Our first tenant is Potbelly. We also have a local entrepreneur who grew up in the neighborhood who's opening a Cleaners, as well as another young woman who grew up in the neighborhood and is opening a bakery there. So those are the kinds of small quality of life projects that we also, so I guess my point is they all work together.
So a comprehensive community development frame
yep.
really can push the neighborhood to a positive tipping point. But Angie's being really modest, so how many of you know of Lane's Bakery, if you're Far Southsiders? That's great to see. So the tenant that she's referring to as a bakery is going to be Lane, so we're really excited to have them in the Pullman Retail Center. Just great impact, Angie. Sydney?
Yeah, so two things that I'll focus in on is one that is, in the context of kind of what our business focus is as a firm, two, one public sector, one private sector financing that we have worked on, and we work on a number of financings. And so when Calvin was introducing kind of what we do, we help our companies raise capital, and so we're working with large Fortune 500 companies to do that, as well as middle market sized companies, helping them to raise capital and or do strategic transactions that allow for them to grow and build greater scale. So one piece is actually we work quite a bit with ComEd and the Exelon company around the capital raising that they do to facilitate the capital expenditure budget that they have on an annual basis, which is focused on a lot of the work that you'll see going on around the city, which is continuing to keep the electrical system upgraded and hardened so that it is less resistant to storm activity. And I think most people in the audience know that there's a real focus by ComEd in terms of how it is that we continue to attract folks to opportunities to work in STEM in the context of the utility. Utilities are facing a significant shortage of folks that are involved in kind of the work across the board that they do, including that work that's out in the field. And so they spend quite a bit of time through this center as well as others and collaborations in terms of focusing on how it is you continue to attract folks to these careers so that they have access to those jobs. The second piece is around the city of Chicago. We do a lot of financing work with the city. One of the things that they did, and it continues, and it's continuing now, a couple of years ago, the city did a large bond transaction to focus in on continuing to upgrade the water infrastructure in the city. And so Loop was involved in doing that. So you'll see a lot of projects that are going on throughout the city that are very inconvenient, but are really focused on upgrading the water system. And so that work is done through existing employees in the water department, as well as through contractors. And as you know, the city is focused on making sure that there is inclusion opportunities for contractors that are working in the context of their needs. And so those are two things that I would focus in on. And then the third, and I'll have Ingo talk about that, because the one connection that we need to make, so when we say JLC Infrastructure, which is the team that Ingo is an important part of, it's Johnson Loop Capital Infrastructure Fund. And the Johnson is Urban Magic Johnson, who is our partner in that fund, and Ingo can talk about that a little bit more. But the other project that we are involved in from a project team perspective is the plan for the Michael Reese development. And then Ingo, I'll have you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney.
Thanks for that introduction,
Please.
Calvin. Good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to participate in this session. As Calvin briefly mentioned, JLC Infrastructure is an investor and asset management firm that focuses on pursuing and making investments in the U.S. infrastructure space. If you take a step back and look at the U.S. infrastructure investment landscape, you're seeing an increasing trend of private sector investment firms make investments in projects that are extremely critical to the communities that those projects serve. And you're also seeing in tandem an increasing trend of municipalities and local and state agencies turn to the private sector to help them finance and operate and manage these projects and assets, some of which historically have been owned and operated by these municipalities. A project that we're currently involved in right now, which we're really excited about, is a massive renovation and redevelopment project at Denver International Airport. For those who are not familiar with that airport, it is such a critical asset to the city of Denver and frankly to the state of Colorado. To put that in perspective, the airport contributes about roughly $25 billion or so on an annual basis to the state's economy. The scope of the project involves a redevelopment of a central terminal called the Great Hall at the airport. As you can imagine, it involves a pretty complex construction phase and work plan. And I think one of the primary reasons we're really excited about this project is through this massive construction phase, it's anticipated that the project will create roughly 450 jobs, construction jobs, and a number of these jobs will be ultimately allocated to locally based contractors. I think one of the reasons why we were brought into this project is, as Sydney mentioned, Urban Johnson is a partner in this venture, and he has played such an instrumental role in effectively going to the city, meeting with folks locally, and ultimately helping to put together a plan which will target minority-owned and women-owned business enterprises in terms of ensuring that they are maximum participants in this job creation sort of process. As part of the project, we will be creating a massive amount of concession space within the airport. And so through these concession opportunities, we also anticipate that this project will create roughly 800 permanent jobs. Again, very much targeted towards folks that are based in the city of Denver. And one of the critical, elements of this project, which we will be primarily responsible for, is setting up an academy at the airport. And the purpose of this academy is to train locally based employees to provide them the skills necessary to be able to run a number of these concessions that will be ultimately created as a result of this project. And so, our big motivation and our primary goal is to help obviously increase the skill set of folks that are based there, and to ultimately incentivize folks that are going to be running these concessions to not only hire local talent, but to retain local talent. So, this project is very pivotal to the city of Denver, and we're really excited about the prospects in terms of it positively impacting the community.
It sounds very, very exciting, Ingo, and I've spent quite a bit of time at that airport in Denver, so I'm glad you're making it easier to navigate, and you're also hiring people from the weaker parts of Denver as well to work there.
Right, absolutely.
So, yeah, and then just one other thing. So I just want to just to talk just to hit a little bit on kind of our role in the context of the Michael Reese development as well is. So one of the things that we'll be doing
Sydney, that's a common denominator across the three of you, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
all three firms, all three parties are involved in that development.
Exactly, and so just the financing piece of it. And so one of the things that Ingo talked about in terms of these projects that we work on from an infrastructure perspective in terms of putting equity into those projects with our fund. The other piece of that we're doing as a broker-dealer at Loop is to get involved from a financial advisory perspective in terms of helping to spearhead the capital that needs to be raised for those projects to come to fruition. And so, I think that academy is really interesting. And goes, you talk about it in terms of how it is that you can create that as a best practice around other types of infrastructure projects that occur, here in Chicago as well as other places around the country.
So Sydney, I'm glad you pointed out that interconnectivity, because it's a perfect segue to going back to the theme of this session, which is the Michael Reese redevelopment could represent hundreds of millions, if not multiple billions of investment, depending on how the entire acreage and attendant acreage sort of plays out over a number of years going forward. So when we think about, and I want to be very respectful to the trailblazers and pathfinders in Bronzeville who've been working hard over the last couple of decades to sort of push the neighborhood forward and make it ripe for big money and big development, if you will. So we've got Rhonda McFarland from QCDC. Organization has been very involved in making sure that outside investors and in-neighborhood investors could see the potential of Bronzeville. We've got the community builders and Joe Williams from the Granite Companies, who's worked across multiple phases of Oakwood Shores to, again, prime the pump for additional development. Angie's firm, CNI, and others were essential in bringing the Marianos, which I understand neighborhood residents call Club M, online in Bronzeville as well. Fred Bonner with his developments back in the early days, and tens of local, we call them lovingly mom and pop real estate developers who've been rehabbing small residential properties, brownstones, graystones, townhomes, and building new construction in the neighborhood for the past 20 years. But we're at a new milestone where some really large players see a tremendous opportunity on the Bronzeville South Lakefront. So I'd like to just ask directly, so why now? And do you all think it will last?
So I'll kind of start. I mean, I think the why now answers are fairly obvious. I mean, it's always been apparent to the residents of Bronzeville, how special of a place it is and what the opportunities were. But the why now is, I mean, there really are, when you think about kind of the city and kind of each of the pieces that are, the things that are happening kind of on the south lakefront part of the city, all things have come together to make it, really a great opportunity, right? I mean, these things happen because folks see financial opportunity. I mean, that's first and foremost, and those are the drivers. And so there are opportunities for that. I'm on the Obama Foundation Inclusion Council, and obviously with the announcement of the Presidential Library going into Jackson Park, you really start to create kind of a necklace and connected opportunities, really from the very south end of the lakefront all the way through to downtown, of opportunities where you've got scale opportunities that get created and a real viable and vibrant economic ecosystem that creates, great opportunities for development.
Great. And do you think it will last, Sydney?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. And so it's interesting, right? Because I think a lot of us saw as we came through the financial crisis, because we had started to feel this inertia in terms of development activity, in the broader Bronzeville community, and then the financial crisis really impacted that fairly negatively. But we've got some pieces, I think, that are highly sustainable, that can help it so that we don't have that dip. And the dip, you may get one, but it won't be as low as it was when we came through the financial crisis. So I think we've got kind of a good foundation for moving forward with development that will be over probably a couple of decades, but still exciting nonetheless.
From a community development perspective, the South Lakefront and the site in general are just, the assets are just tremendous. I mean, it's sort of global in character with its access to downtown, the location next to McCormick Place, sort of welcomes the world to right there, but then very local in character where you're surrounded by diverse neighborhoods celebrating Chicago's culture. So it's rare to have an opportunity to sort of marry all of that together in one site with, of course, the lake at your front door. So those are tremendous assets of the site and Bronzeville, the sort of South Lakefront in general. And then just a lot, your connection to transportation, your connection to fiber and connectivity, your workforce and your connection to local institutions, educational institutions. There's just so many assets that this area of the city, Bronzeville, and the Michael Reese site sort of bring together all at once.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'll add is, I was telling Calvin, I'm relatively new to the city of Chicago and particularly new to Bronzeville, but in sort of reading up on effectively the things that have been going on here, I think you're starting to see a trend of anchor institutions that are based here really and truly sort of investing in projects here. I recently read about the University of Chicago and the charter school, the Woodlawn Charter School, and that facility opening up. And so, if I put my infrastructure hat on for a second, it often takes sort of anchor, sort of pioneering, if you will, sort of trigger events to really promote or spur sort of infrastructure investment as a whole. And so I think as you continue to see sort of anchor institutions that are based here invest in these communities and really build and develop these groundbreaking facilities, that in itself ultimately promotes even more investment as well. So.
I think those are great responses, and Paula Robinson, who asked me to moderate this panel, thank you, Paula, wherever you are in the room, will take me out into the woodshed later because I'm not following the script. So I think a big elephant in the room around the prospect of big money, big development coming to the South Lakefront is around what to do with legacy residents and legacy commercial property owners. How do we involve those of us in the community who are underutilized in all of this upside, right? At the QCDC 20th anniversary celebration a few weeks back, there was a little bit of a roundtable, a sort of brainstorming session around what should be the priorities of a local community development organization that is at the intersection of this big money, big development, and trying to preserve a sense of community ownership, to preserve the culture, cultural assets and cultural feel of the neighborhood that Angie described. So as you all think about the fact that it's coming, it seems real and sustainable. And I know, Sydney, you talked about how in the infrastructure work you're doing with ComEd, there's an emphasis on making sure that there's an enormous amount of sole source hiring and local hiring and pulling people into the mainstream. Ingo, you talked about at Denver, even though the airport does not sit on a low-income community, you're trying to still improve lower-income communities in metropolitan Denver by making sure that there's a targeted hiring program to pull the less fortunate into the labor pool at the airport, which is still an effective strategy to help lift incomes in lower wealth places. So how do the three of you think about creating that win-win scenario where you have the big things happening, but also local players get to stay in place. They get to enjoy the upside on the homeownership side, on the employment side, on the small business creation and maintenance side. If you could talk about that a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I'll share a little bit of the work that we're doing on the Obama Foundation from an Inclusion Council perspective, because the focus is really, doing just what you're saying, is that, this development of the library and kind of all of the impact, the economic impact that it will have, it obviously is going to have a community impact as well, and making sure that community residents and businesses are connected to this major opportunity that exists in the library's presence in Jackson Park. And one of those pieces is, one, making sure that kind of all of the organizations that have been involved in, helping to get the community to where it is now are fully engaged in the process, and really leveraging those, the core competencies of those organizations to continue to make sure that the community and its residents are ready for being engaged. These folks are already ready. Some folks still need more readiness and really utilizing those organizations that exist to do that, to do that work, to make sure that folks are able to benefit from the presence of these development opportunities. So I think the full engagement of those community organizations and making sure that they're viable and able to deliver on their mission in the context of this will be really important to the process overall.
So there's an element of intentionality there in planning
absolutely.
that you're lifting up.
Absolutely.
I would just echo that. Yeah, I think you have to just really have to be very thoughtful in the approach. And the example I can give kind of goes back to Pullman and how you try and use every opportunity to leverage community economic development. So for instance, by example, when we're rehabbing historic Pullman homes, we're acquiring vacant homes that have been vacant for some time. They were built over 100 years ago. So how can we leverage that opportunity to employ people? We've been partnering with a group called Chicago Cred, or the Emerson Collective, to hire gentlemen who want to sort of turn their life around and want to get some employment experience, and been working with a local contractor to train them on deconstruction and rehab opportunities and those sort of things. So using those opportunities, even small opportunity to leverage. We also, at my organization, we have a micro, it's
a little hard to hear in the back.
Oh, is it hard to hear in the back? Okay.
Oh, sorry. At my organization.
Is that better?
We have a sorry about that. Thank you. We have a microfinance group, so where we are able to provide capital to small businesses. We've done just under 100 loans, almost $2 million worth of loans, very small loans, maybe that larger financial institutions can't take on, probably in the $14,000, $15,000 range, for catering companies, for transportation companies, those kinds of things, making sure that we connect those kinds of resources to larger redevelopment efforts.
I want to thank you, Angie, for financing Mangiani Cafe in South Shore. It's the first new sit-down restaurant we've had in South Shore, and Dr. Adams, 20 or 30 years? And it's beautiful, the food is excellent, and that was financed by CNI, Microfinance Group.
Thanks. Awesome.
I'm sorry. So in terms of the industry which we operate in, a large portion of the projects that we pursue are called public-private partnerships. And essentially all that term really means is private sector entities, investment firms such as ourselves, entering into a formal partnership with government entities. And so a number of these projects that we pursue are very much led by municipal agencies. And what's becoming, a trend that's becoming increasingly prominent is as these municipalities evaluate which private sector entities to effectively partner up with is how comprehensive and how innovative is their plan to engage with the community, to foster job creation and just to ensure that the community is not left behind. And so, if I go back to this Denver Airport project, that was really a big part of the evaluation process. And as the project's progressed, we've had several outreach events where, again, Urban Johnson has been involved in this quite a bit, where we've met with schools, we've met with city officials, And we've ultimately been tasked with coming up with a very comprehensive plan to ensure that the community is with us every step of the way in terms of this project, and ultimately we're helping the growth of the economy, so to speak. And so again, we're increasingly seeing that trend of placing this requirement on private sector entities to come up with super innovative plans in terms of developing and empowering the community going forward.
That's great, Ingo. So I think what you've heard from the three of them is that in years gone by, for many community development finance and brick and mortar real estate development professionals, the emphasis had sort of rested really on sort of the improvement on the real estate, the bricks and sticks, the buildings, the properties, and we might have been a little bit too myopic with that vision, but we've all evolved across all the planks and the ways in which we support our communities, and it's clear that the emphasis on human capital development, that's not just getting people in jobs, but that's also making sure that locally based enterprises have access to the great new real estate assets, as well as procurement opportunities and vendoring opportunities. That's how you lift all these boats at the same time. So it's fantastic to see that we've all evolved to that frame of thinking, and I think it'll make the win-win scenario when you have big investment coming to lower wealth communities, truly that for all stakeholders. So that's exciting to talk about.
Kelvin, I just wanted to, just Angie, to follow up on your point, because you talked about kind of the new restaurant in South Shore, because we don't want to miss the importance of access to capital in the context of this. So we're talking about the community engagement, making sure that folks are ready for the jobs that are being created, but it's also the business aspect of it in terms of the involvement with the overall project, and then kind of the ongoing businesses that really kind of create a holistic nature of redevelopment. And so one of the things that we focus in on, we tend to work help folks raise larger amounts of money. But there are vehicles, obviously, in terms of what you guys are doing in terms of the microfinancing piece. But there's other elements, and actually Paula mentioned this in the press conference. She talked about the Jobs Act, and she didn't really hit that in a lot of detail, but in terms of that, was essentially put in place during President Obama, actually about 5 years ago now, which is in the context of being able to raise capital. It's a way for smaller businesses to crowdfund and raise capital with securities, and not having to have the burden of the expense that had heretofore been related, that was connected to that. You really didn't have that as a way to do it. But we do have other, my point is that we've got other vehicles for businesses to think about for raising capital and to be able to have the skill to be involved in the redevelopment as it's occurring in communities.
I tell you, Sydney's a mind reader because she keeps creating these perfect segues. So we've got a few more minutes for us to converse amongst ourselves, and we're going to open up the floor so that you guys can have a conversation directly with the panelists. So that's a perfect segue to pivot to policy. So at the federal level, we can talk a little bit about what's in the offing in terms of infrastructure support from the White House, from Congress. If we could also talk about what your thoughts are on local policy initiatives that could be emboldened or put in place to again, preserve legacy residents and business owners and help the less fortunate in the community participate in the upside of the community. And then last but not least, in terms of financing tools. The city, as we all know, has recently launched a raft of economic development programs, the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, Thrive Zones. They're trying to be more creative in using the TIF dollars. Are there any additional tools on that plank that the city could roll out? So federal infrastructure support, right? Legacy preservation policy tactics, and then any other additional municipal economic development tools. So that's a lot, but if we could try to speak to those a little bit before we open the floor for our participants.
Do you want to talk about the federal?
I can talk about the federal.
Yeah.
So, I think I'm sure a number of folks here have seen the headlines in terms of the administration and touting this $1 trillion infrastructure plan. I think admittedly so. We're still waiting on a number of details regarding the plan. But I think it's fair to say we're relatively optimistic, sitting here today in terms of the details that will be included in that plan that will hopefully foster and spur infrastructure investment. I think there have been rumors in terms of specific tax credits effectively being lumped into that infrastructure plan, tax credits that would ultimately incentivize private sector investment. And so if that materializes, I think we certainly see that really sort of bumping and spurring infrastructure investment. The administration's proposed 2018 budget includes a couple of financing provisions that we think will be extremely helpful in terms of spurring private sector infrastructure investment. The Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, that's a mouthful, as TIFI as it's commonly called, is a federal loan program where essentially the federal government lends money to fund surface transportation projects of priority across the U.S. And the current budget proposal includes an increase in the amount of money that's allocated to that program. And so we think, again, if that's passed into law, we think that will be extremely beneficial in terms of spurring infrastructure and private sector investment, so to speak. The last sort of funding initiative that's again included in the current 2018 sort of budget proposal is a financing sort of security known as private activity bonds. Simply put, private activity bonds are bonds that are issued on behalf of private sector entities to finance projects that meet certain eligibility requirements. The existing law places a cap in terms of how much in private activity bonds can be issued at roughly $15 billion or so. To date, we've issued and allocated roughly $11 billion or so. And so the current budget proposal includes one, getting rid of that cap, and two, increasing the eligibility requirements in terms of the projects that can be financed with the private activity bonds as well. So I think those three key measures, ones that we're optimistic about in terms of hopefully being put into law, and we think it will really and truly spur infrastructure, private sector infrastructure investment.
So Ingo, the crystal ball around the infrastructure bill has been spinning pretty wildly since the president got elected. Right. What's your prognosis? How are you handicapping the probability? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, thanks, Calvin. I don't know that I don't know that there's a crystal ball, to be honest with you. I mean, I think I will say this: in terms of if you look at the sheer needs and from an infrastructure investment perspective across the country. It is. The void is huge, right? And so there is a critical need for federal dollars to be allocated to projects across the country. When you look at the number of deficient bridges on a state-by-state basis, you look at the number of critical roads or highways that need some level of maintenance and operations work. The need is so great, and so I think from that perspective, there's a sense of urgency, and so I would say with that backdrop, I'm pretty optimistic that something will get done, but again, I think it's hard to predict in terms of the level of the amount of money and the amount of the level of detail ultimately that will materialize with whatever plan is put into place. So. It's probably not a great response to your question, Calvin, but that's all I can tell you for now. So.
I think we've all become accustomed to those responses.
But I think even let's just say nothing happens on a federal level, right? The fact of the matter is that we've got tremendous infrastructure needs across the country, including in our own city. And so then what you'll see happen is that private capital will be attracted to the opportunities. It's going to be more expensive, right? I mean, it'll cost all of us more, right? Because let's just say if you've got a bridge that needs to be redone, right? Then you're going to toll the bridge, and then we just that's how it gets paid for. So you'll end up with more of those kinds of constructs if there isn't the funding from a federal perspective or some lower cost contribution from a federal perspective. So it's going to happen, right? I mean, it has to happen. It's just a function of how much does it cost us, users of whatever that particular infrastructure asset is.
Right. So any additional legacy policies or economic development tools, really quickly, because we want to make sure the participants can engage with you guys.
So I just in terms of at the very ground level neighborhood development, we rely on resources from all levels of government, from new market tax credits at the federal level, and there's been a big advocacy push. There's a conference in Chicago right now to really push to maintain that tool. It's an incredibly powerful tool to finance new commercial and industrial retail development in neighborhoods throughout the city and throughout the country that need it most. We rely on city and local resources like TIF, and some of the new programs, as Calvin mentioned, that are being rolled out are very innovative in terms of providing leveraging high redevelopment areas to bring resources to areas that need redevelopment resources. So like the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, very important for us. And then I think one other thing worth pointing out is just as of late, we've really seen some really interesting corporate and philanthropic efforts to really boost neighborhood redevelopment, like the Chase Pro Neighborhoods program that you talked about. The new announcement by Chase for $40 million for Chicago for redevelopment efforts.
Particularly for low wealth communities.
Low wealth communities. Benefit Chicago, which is committed to bringing additional kinds of capital into communities. Chicago Trend, which brings resources for retail development. So all of these tools, from our perspective, are critical.
That's great, Angie. So I would pose a challenge to the Bronzeville Community Development Partnership, but I know we've got to wrap up, Rhonda. So as we think about tools to keep legacy residents and business owners in place, I would encourage us all to be working with all of our stakeholders to push forward on property tax stabilization activities, to create conservation areas, right, so that the existing affordable housing units can stay in place and not get moved away, making sure that people can easily access subsidy tools in a really convenient way is going to be really important, right? And working with innovative devices such as cooperative housing and community land trusts and community land banks will be another way to try to keep legacy residents in place. So let's keep that in mind. It's a challenge, Rhonda, to the partnership to be thinking about those as we work with these larger developments coming online. So I'm going to stop talking and open the floor for you all to have a discussion with our panelists. Any questions? Don't be shy. Layton, it's great to see you, by the way.
Layton Olson with the Internet Public Trust that have been involved in activities, telecom and economic development, foreclosure, impact area activities, so a couple of different sides. I wanted to go back to the Career Academy thing that maybe brings together everyone in Denver or here. A lot of things at IIT and others have focused every 2 years on having people come to the Smart Course Student Summit at McCormick Place. So the question is, for the Career Academy kind of an area, how do we enable many youth from ages 14 to 16, 17 come every 2 years to McCormick Place and just know it's right in our backyard. And it's in 2016, 17,000 students, parents, and educators came from all over the Midwest. I guess one of the questions that Magic Johnson, former President Obama, might come there the 10th or the 15th next year. It's right at the beginning of the school year. It takes a lot of cooperation to get hang buses and everything else, and a lot of the community persons can get there too. If you get there, you get in free. So I just wanted to see if that might be, and that's one kind of a career academy, but it might take the whole career pipeline concept with the academy on one end down to each point and see how that might be something that could work together in the next 10, 11 months.
Yeah, I guess, the only thing I would say is, I think I'm on. Okay, we're on. Yeah, I agree with that. Just a couple things. One, I think in terms of, one, you should reach out to and coordinate with the Obama Foundation because they're looking at a lot of collaborations to engage youth. In fact, the foundation just, I think it was this past weekend, actually just did a summit with young people, essentially helping to prepare them for community activism and engagement, civic engagement. And so I think that that's certainly very consistent with what it is that President Obama wants to be able to focus in on with youth. And so you should absolutely reach out to the foundation to coordinate around their involvement in that event. I think to continue to do the work that you're trying to do.
And Sydney, could you connect Layton to the folks
Yeah,
at the foundation?
sure.
Not everybody knows how to
Yeah,
sort of
I'm
reach out
happy
to
to do
folks.
that. Yes.
Great, thanks. I think we've got time, if Rhonda will allow, for a couple more questions. So, Dr. Adams?
Yeah, 'cause I got this mic. Okay, so I'm interested in things at a sort of more micro level, because this is such a large level of engagement here about the community assets and how we involve the local assets. Yeah, I know.
Great. Let's stop the echo.
Both of them can't code.
Trying to turn it off. There's only one way to push this button, and I pushed it down. I don't know if that did it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm thinking about social engineering on a local level at the community, and how those organizations and smaller groups, from the block club to the community organization, can really get engaged at a meaningful level, at a level that recognizes the assets that exist within the community, that sort of speak to some of your questions and suggestions that you made, and how that begins early in the process rather than as an afterthought. You know, how does it in fact get funded? Because you see the local organizations struggling with one or two people, trying to keep these things afloat enough to really get engaged and really recognize. I mean, sometimes the train is long out of the station before we can begin to address some of these things that help to preserve the local residents, help to bring opportunity directly to them. So just to put it in a couple of sentences, I think we need numbers of goals that say in X community, because we always talk about the unemployment, if we can put X number of people to work within X period of time, it will have this exponential effect. I'm looking for some of that in the planning when we talk about these things.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I think, you know, one of the things, and I'm glad you mentioned this point, is that there is,
Should be on.
there's also this opportunity around, because you've got the micro level, I totally agree, you've got to be active there, but then there's the micro collective effort, right? Because one of the issues that we have is that you may have a lot of really small organizations that are struggling because, you know, they just don't have enough scale and there just aren't enough dollars to fund every single organization. And so there's an opportunity to have this collective, right, which, you know, gives strength in numbers, but still has the impact and the sensitivity to kind of what that need is at that level that you don't want to miss out on. And so I think that there's an opportunity for us to, you know, to think about what that construct looks like, so that you can, you know, have some scale to the effort, but you still maintain the, the focus on kind of that resident need, and having that, you know, being able to have the benefit of the input around that. Because the funding thing is an issue, right? I mean, I wish I don't have an answer for it. I mean, there are more and more limited dollars, as we all know. I'm sorry.
Building it in might help too.
That's true. Now, that's the other thing. Now, the other piece is in the context of the development. So, that there is an opportunity to make sure that just gets included as a part of the project, right? Like I know our Alderman King, because you can have, when folks are doing kind of housing redevelopment, these high rises, et cetera, they can kind of put money in a fund, or, you can actually kind of make it something really real. And I know she's focused on having that happen so that you have like a real impact and not just kind of this, something that you just put aside. Yeah, exactly.
Great response, Sydney. Thank you. So Ron, I'm looking at you. Can we take one more question or do we have to wrap it up? Okay, she's allowing me to. So, Rosalind?
Just to piggyback on what
We've got two more?
Dr.
Okay.
Adams said here. I'm listening to everything, it sounds great, but I'm gonna tell you something. I was a contractor in this city for a long time, and I don't see the trade unions up there. And I would just like to know, where is that cooperation?
Yeah.
Because
In terms of getting the
people,
trade unions to be more
that's
inclusive?
right. And every time you bring up the Davis-Bacon Act in this city, they tell you, oh yeah, that's nice, but the union owns this ground. The union owns this window. So when you talk about sustainability, and this is all great with money, we need cooperation from the unions out here to help us have that sustainability. A lot of union people live in those certain communities. They don't always live where I live. You understand where I'm coming from?
We
Yeah?
do, Rosalind.
And so that impacts insurance, your financing, your bonding, and everything else. And so it's nice to have small developers. When you start talking about doing zip codes, that's when the big D comes in, and that's when your kid is trying to fight in the trade, and he's not going to get it because they're not on board with these small organizations. And if they were, then Dr. Adams wouldn't have to talk about it being there because they would be invested in that development. And they are not. And I'm telling you that because it's a personal experience. It doesn't happen at the city level where they give a developer a waiver for not using a WBE or DBE or MBE because I can't find one.
Exactly.
And then tell me I'm an MBE, I'm qualified, but look, you're under the same rules. You gotta have 3% women too. Wait a minute, I'm a minority already. So, you know, they got these systems out here, but there's a systemic problem here,
Right.
and it's not really being addressed. This is nice. I love it about the money, but I'm gonna tell you something, honey. Without the union sitting up here, without old boy from the Park District over the Plumbers Union sitting right there, I don't care what they say. It's gonna be surface, and it ain't gonna touch me.
So Rosalind, your point is incredibly relevant. So I will say that, and I know that there are great minds have differences of opinions about how authentic the Obama Presidential Center is being around that question, but there is a lot of intentionality, and a process is ensuing to try to have subject matter experts to try to negotiate that issue, at least as it relates to the library, which we should applaud the First Family for. But I'll let our experts talk about how across, particularly their larger infrastructure projects, how they're negotiating with the trade unions to try and make them more inclusive.
Well, so I do want to say, so thank you for mentioning the library and the Obama Foundation. So on the Inclusion Council, which is what I serve on, we are very intentional around inclusion on this project, but it's not just for that project. You know, ultimately, the reason why I'm interested in the council is because we want it to be able to serve as a beacon and have impact beyond just the library, right? That it basically becomes the standard bearer of how it is that community development actually gets done, including this issue with the unions. And so, you know, we specifically, you know, are focused on that and are having dialogue with the unions so that we've got long-lasting impact in terms of having our kids be able to become apprentices and be in the union, because that's the issue, right?
That's
They're
right.
not, we're not in the union.
That's right.
And it's hard to get in the union because they don't want us there. And so the whole idea is that if we can use this project to set the foundation, because kind of once you get it going and the door gets open, then it makes it more difficult for that not to happen. So I totally agree with you, and from the foundation perspective, that's a focus so that becomes, you know, institutionalized kind of in our city.
And a national model
Exactly.
for how you
Yeah.
work through that issue. So folks, we're going to have to wrap up. If Paula Robinson comes up to the stage, we know that we've run over time. And Paula's with the Bronzeville Community Development Partnership. So let's put our hands together for our fantastic discussants.